Firstly, I'd like to welcome Your Excellencies, Ambassador of the Republic of Turkey, Koray Ertaş, Ambassador of the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, Çimen Keskin Hanım, our distinguished guests, and to all of you who have come, I'm honoured to be here in your presence today. My slide today, my presentation rather, is about the Turks of Cyprus, who are called by many different names throughout history. Some may prefer the title Cypriot for these people. Commonly, we use the term Turkish Cypriot, Cypriot Turks, Muslims of Cyprus. But what we don't want to do when we're looking at history is what's called the fallacy of presentism. We may see ourselves and our community in one way, but how is it that our people, or the Cypriot Muslims, Turks, saw themselves throughout history?
Sorry guys, it's probably my fault. Yeah.
So I've mentioned different dimensions, different aspects to the Turkish identity of the native Turks of Cyprus. I mentioned Muslim, which adds a religious dimension. I mentioned Turk, an ethnic dimension, a linguistic dimension. So therefore, in order to link the history of these peoples, we need to go back to the very root of who these people are. What I call the spiritual ancestors, and also those who have an ethnic link to those people as well. And hence we can go back all the way to 648 of the Common Era, to which we have what's called the Condominium period. And I would like to consider these people the spiritual ancestors of the Turks in Cyprus. It all started from a prediction by the Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him, where in both the authentic hadiths of Bukhari and Muslim, it is recorded, and it is recorded as being sound or sahih, even by the likes of Sheikh Al-Albani, in that his milk auntie, Haram binti Milhan, who is lovingly known by our people as Hala Sultan, was visited by our dear Prophet. And on those occasions, he actually fell asleep, took a siesta, as one would in those areas. And on the first occasion, he woke up smiling. And he predicted that Haram, who was an elderly lady, would voyage by sea to Cyprus. This would happen a second time. And on this occasion, Haram, Hala Sultan, asked, "Oh, dear Prophet, what is it that makes you smile?" And he repeats the same prediction again. She goes, "Pray that I will be amongst those who would voyage on this naval expedition." You remember the Arabs were in the desert, in the Arabian Peninsula. They were not seafaring people. So this prediction was actually very incredible, considering from the peninsula an old lady to go on a naval expedition. So she requested for the Prophet to pray for her, and he says, "You will be amongst the first to voyage." So there's more accuracy there. And in 648, only within less than 20 years of the Prophet's death, 28th year of the Hijrah, after the migration of the Muslim people from Mecca to Medina, Cyprus was in the hands of the Muslims. This early on, before Anatolia, before Spain, before Morocco, before Pakistan, Cyprus was in the hands of the Muslims, and hence our spiritual link goes back all the way to those ages. We have various periods through that age. As you can see, a 300-year presence of Muslim peoples on the island, from what they call the pious caliphs, the Rashidun, the Umayyads, the Abbasids. And keep in mind, the Abbasid soldiers, this is a period in which the Turks from Central Asia started to become Muslim and were recruited into the armies of the Abbasids. So it's quite possible, or rather reasonable, to assume that there may have been ethnic Turks who were present on the island from that time as well. Now, we all are aware of the binary of how the world is divided in Islam. Darul Harb, the abode of war, and Darul Islam, the abode of Islam. But in Cyprus's case, because it was what is called a condominium, it was shared between two warring powerhouses. The Romans, that being the Eastern Romans, the Byzantines, and the Islamic Empire. They had to share it. And that sharing agreement is called a condominium. But this presented a problem for the politicians, for the Muslim armies. How are we meant to divide when we have this binary of the adobe of war and the adobe of peace? Where does Cyprus come into this? So great scholars came together and they decided for a third rank, Darul Ahd, the adobe of truce. And the people were known, the Cypriots, both the Cypriot Muslims and the Cypriot Christians, were under the pact of Darul Ahd, Ahlul Ahd, the people of truce. Okay, so this is significant in Islamic history, that Cyprus has been pivotal in having an influence over political decisions, which is why I thought it's worth mentioning. There's also the companions of the Prophet who voyaged and stepped foot in Cyprus. I couldn't list all of them because there's so many of these distinguished people. But we have Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, Abu Talha al-Ansari, Haram, who I mentioned, her husband, Ubadah bin as-Samit, Abu Dhar Ghifari, Abu Darda al-Ansari, who is present in Istanbul. These people honoured Cyprus with their presence. Abu Mansur al-Azhari, a scholar, 10th century scholar, actually mentioned in one of his books, وَفِي ثُغُورَ الشَّامِ مَوْضِئٌ يُقَالُ لَهُ قُبْرُسٌ. He says that Cyprus is within the realm of Sham, the Levant, Syria. It's interesting that this is how they perceived it. Whether it's true or not, whether you want to believe it or not, that was the perception that the owners of Cyprus at the time had, that the island was within their realm of control. Interestingly, I see that there's many Cypriots here as well. Anyone from Famagusta here at all? Yeah? Okay. So in Turkish we know it as Mausa, right? Doesn't sound like the Greek Amochostos, or the Italian or the English Famagusta. Mausa comes from the word Marusa of Arabic. And Marusa means a place where you dive. It comes from the root word ros. So if there's anybody amongst us, or you hear anybody saying Magosa, I'm afraid that they are in error. No such thing as Magosa. Mausa derives from Marusa. On the bottom there we have the self-declared Republic of Cyprus, who decided, you know how keen they are for unification, on peace, that they would celebrate that in 965, and you see an image of Emperor Phocas of the Roman Empire, who took complete control of Cyprus. And what happened to those Muslim Cypriots who were there for 300 years? No sign of them. So even that part of the history where we have a history of union between Muslims and Christians is celebrated when they are expelled. Something to think about. Now we move on later on to the Turks. So after the condominium ended, there's a long story, but essentially the Latins or Catholic people start to take over Cyprus. And during that time, there are slaves that are taken. Slaves predominantly from Anatolia, from Turkmens. And Turkmen is a word for the ancestors of the Turks of Cyprus. So the ancestors of the Anatolian Turks, so the ancestors of the Balkan Turks, Turkmen essentially are Oghuz Turks, the Turks of the Western realm. They were taken in great multitudes, such that Maximus Planudes, who dies in 1305, he rejoiced over a victory over these Turkmen. And he said, as can be seen on the bottom there, from the original sources, he says, Os idetien megisten gibru pasan aftom, blithine ke megedi thelin oneste. As already the greatest part of Cyprus has been filled with them, meaning the Turkmens. And they no longer wish to benefit from it. They were benefiting from this slavery, but such was the sheer number of these Turkish Turkmen slaves in Cyprus that it presented a threat. The people were getting anxious with these numbers of Turks on the island. Despite this, their influx continued. And decades later, we have primary sources from Nikephoros Gregoras, who died in 1360, a contemporary historian, that between 1330 and 1340, there was frequent arrival of Turkish prisoners of war into Cyprus. What happened to these people? Sometimes the ones who had, or were able to remain as Muslims were purchased back, but many of them were baptized, meaning that they became Christian. So what happened to that bloodline? What happened to those Turks? They are the ancestors, or part of the ancestry of our neighbours, the Cypriot Greeks. They also share in this, and I think this is something we should celebrate, that we have something in common here. There was a time in 1326, we can see the image there with the soldiers on the horses, of the Battle of Hirokitia in 1326, which is a battle in which the Mamluks of Egypt, Mamluk means slave in Arabic, but this was a Turkish dynasty of predominantly Kipchak heritage. Their Sultan Barsbay sent his commander Tagribirdi. Tagribirdi in Anatolian Turkish is Tanrı verdi, who was the commander and led an expedition to Cyprus, in which, and mind you, they didn't call themselves Mamluk. Mamluk it's an Arabic word meaning slave, because they were taken as slaves but eventually took control of the state. The official name was Ad-Dawlati Turkiya, the Turkish state. And the kings, the sultans of the Mamluks were known as Muluka Turk, the Turkish kings. So although they weren't Oghuz stock, they were Kipchak Turks taken from the Caucasus and modern-day Crimea and Ukraine. Such were their numbers and influence in this Mamluk state. They took control of Cyprus. They were controlling who would be leading it. They took tributary from them. But in the war of 1426, the Mamluks saw that there were Turkish Muslims supporting the Christians. They were mercenaries. There were Turkmen Anatolian mercenaries supporting the Christian Latin Cypriots in their battle against the Mamluks. They were led by a person called Garamanoğlu Ali Bey, who was a Turkmen of southern Anatolian extract. So whilst they were merciful to the Christians, they put the Turkmens to the sword. They were treacherous to their ethnic and religious brethren. So hence that is the punishment for such treachery. We forward on to the Ottoman era from 1570 to 1878, during the time of Sultan Selim II, who is the son of Kanuni Sultan Süleyman the Magnificent. The reasoning for this was there was periodical attacks by pirates who were using Cyprus as a base to attack Muslim pilgrims, to attack Muslim traders. These were Turks and Arabs who were being attacked, and Cyprus was used as a base. Furthermore to that, before the Ottomans could actually attack, they needed a fetva, a license. Like the Sultan isn't a king or dictator, he needs a religious verdict, a license, before he can proceed with any plans that he has. And so he asked Ebu Suud Effendi, who was a Shaykh al-Islam at the time, a great Hanafi scholar, and he said, you can proceed. Beyond the fact that they were being attacked by pirates using Cyprus as a base, he also mentioned something interesting, that Cyprus used to have Cemavi, Mesajid, ve Medaris, that there were jamis, grand mosques, and there were mosques, and there were schools, madrasas in Cyprus, which were all wiped out. He's referring back to the spiritual ancestors, which I mentioned earlier. And henceforth, it was their right to take something which already belonged to the Muslims at one point. The settlement policy. Initially, Greek Cypriots, or Greek Orthodox should we say, which is a more accurate term. Greek Cypriot is a modern term. In fact, the Greeks did not even call themselves as such, but we'll get onto that as the slides progress. Initially, Greek Orthodox people who were subservient to the Latins. They were serfs, slaves in effect, having to work a day or two a week for their Latin overlords. Orthodoxy was oppressed. So many had fled the island. The Ottomans first said, the Greek Orthodox should come back. You are welcome back to the island. Your island, our island. Secondly, the island was emptied and the production needed to increase, and so Ottoman soldiers were allowed to remain. Those who wished to do so could live on the island, and those who were bachelors had Anatolian wives sent to marry them as well. Those were the first settlers. Those were the precursors, the the genesis of the Turkish people, the Muslim people of Cyprus. Soon after, skilled artisans and their families from mostly south central Anatolian regions were sent to settle in Cyprus as well. It was an island of exile, but when we say island of exile, there's a saying that's mentioned, as if Cyprus is like Australia and the British policy of sending criminals there. Yes, there were some criminals, but there were also Türkmen, Yörüks, politicians, intellectuals, religious classes who were sent. Intellectual people, people of high class, high esteem, were sent to Cyprus. So we shouldn't just focus on a criminal element, right? There were slaves, which were continual. And when we think of slavery, don't think of transatlantic slavery. It's not racial. In fact, in one time in Cyprus's Ottoman history, 50% of the slaves were black, and the other 50% were from the Caucasus, white, much whiter than me. And the slavery was such that he or she would be part of the household. They would work in the fields and in the house, but they also would be married off by their masters. They would be treated as humans. They are also our ancestors as well. In fact, some villages we have which are predominantly dark-skinned. They are also our people. We don't look through a racial lens. Too many people nowadays do an ancestry test, DNA test. I'm this percent Cypriot, I'm this percent Anatolian. Oh my God, I have 2% Italian. Wow, I'm European now. No, they're all Cypriot. They're all part of our people. There was voluntary internal migration. When I say internal, from the Ottoman state, just imagine one country. So someone from the Balkans, Egypt, Algeria, Urfa, was all one country. Lefkoşa, Nicosia, was all one country. So you had internal migration, people going, leaving Cyprus, people coming to Cyprus. And towards the end of the Ottoman era, we had the sad case of Mauryan refugees, current day Greece. The Muslims fled from there. The Caucasus, the Circassians had fled the oppression by the Russians, and also from Crete, which is a very similar case to Cyprus, although the majority of them were Greek-speaking, unlike in Cyprus where the majority were Turkish-speaking. The settlement wasn't a one-off, it was continual, as I mentioned. But the first families, it should be noted, were as the following: Beyşehir, Aksaray, and so on. And I've created this map there for your benefit, dear audience, regarding the pinpointed locations. And as you can see, central, southern Anatolian lands were sent to Cyprus. Initially, just in 1572 alone, we have 1,689 Anatolian families. I failed to mention earlier regarding those who had been settled and the class of the people that were sent. I'll give you a few examples. 18th of May 1755, the Grand Vizier Hekimoğlu Ali Pasha was exiled to Cyprus. Namık Kemal, one of the young Ottomans, was exiled to Mausa, Famagusta. Muhammad el-Kandahari, Kandahar being in modern-day Afghanistan, he was from the Resmiye branch of the Qadiri order, and is currently buried also in Mausa, Famagusta. Adpazarı Şeyh Es-Seyyid Osman Efendi of the Celvetiye order was exiled again to Famagusta, because Famagusta, Qal'a-i Mausa, or Qal'a-i Lefkoşa, the castles of Nicosia and castles of Famagusta, made these people what they call Kalebend, or Cezire island, prisoners of an island, or prisoners of a castle. Arab Alizade Abdurrahim Efendi in 1755. These are the ancestors of the Turkish people in Cyprus, the natives. So we must think of it in that, through that lens. I mentioned the Yörük and the Türkmen. So the Yörüks are from the western branch of Turks, from the Oğuz branch. They are semi-nomadic people. We still have Yörüks to this day, wandering in Anatolia and also the Balkans as well. There is a sample of the tribes of the Jemaat, the clans that settled in Cyprus. And we have an original document there, in case anyone's thinking, well, Can we be sure about this? The Ottomans were meticulous in their record keeping. And here we have an example of such from 1714. This third branch here that we have, the Karahaculu, Kürtcülür, Tekelü, Melmenci, and so on, they were sent in 1714. These guys, they were troublemakers. They were from amongst that class. Because they were causing such mischief, the Shaykhul Islam Abdullah Efendi said, anybody of these tribe or the clans of these Turkmens or the Yörüks who resist exile should be put to the sword. So they had a lot of motivation to go to Cyprus. There were also non-Turkish Muslims. Now, a disclaimer. Anatolian Turks also are mixed. There were big dervishes going around and giving what they call dawah in Arabic, inviting people to Islam. So the Anatolian Turks also are a mixture of these Turkmens and Armenians and Greeks and so Rums, Bosniaks, Albanians. There's nothing wrong with that. The Kazakhs are mixed. There is no pure race. There's no pure Greek or English, right? This is all part of history, all part of that heritage. But the core of which, the dominant culture, was that of the Turks, of course, because it's still spoken to this day and the culture continues. But there were non-Turkish Muslims, Albanians, Arabs from the Levantine, Shami Arabs, Egyptians, Sudanese, Algerians, and so on. There were Bosniaks, Muslims from the center of Europe, from Bosnia. Circassians, Roma, Gypsy, which in the records is Cingane or Çingene. I realize this may be an offensive term in today's day and age, but remember, we're not using current day standards. In that day and age, that's how they were recorded. And there were also many converts, Arab Maronites of Cyprus, Armenians, Latins, Romios, who currently call themselves Greek Cypriots. But this, again, should be taken as part of our heritage, but the bulk, of course, was Turkish. As you can see here from the records from the Kıbrıs Ceziresi'nin Nüfus-i Müslümin Defteri, from the records of the Muslim census of 1831. We have Medine-i Münevvereli, Muhammed Emin bin Ismail, from Medina, Muhammad Emin, son of Ismail. We have somebody who's recorded as living in Piskobu, which is in southern Cyprus, Bosna Saraylı Boşnak Hacı Mustafa bin Ömer Hacı Ömer, from Sarajevo in Bosnia. All the way from Sarajevo, he settled in Cyprus. And in the bottom there's an interesting story of Christofi Andon. He was dressing as a Muslim, and so there was a formal complaint. How dare he dress as a Muslim? In those day and age, the millets were divided according to dress as well. A Christian Orthodox would dress as an Orthodox. A Catholic would dress as an Orthodox, a Jew as a Jew, and a Muslim as a Muslim. So this idea of living all together and sharing this, yes, we share the same geography, but we were very divided, even in the clothing that we were wearing. And so this Christon was walking around as a Muslim, and so an official complaint was made. It turned out he had converted to Islam. This was in 1594, very early on in the Turkish Cypriot history. Some Ottoman-era landmarks. We have schools which were known as Idadi, Rushdiye, Medrese. These are different divisions. So you have preschool, you have primary school, as you would call it in the UK, and Medrese, which would be an Ottoman version of universities, and you'd have Müderris, who were professors. We have many mosques, Hala Sultan, Arab Ahmet, Bayraktar, Cami Cedid in Leymosun. We have caravansarais, the Büyük Han being the most famous of which. Aqueduct, Ebu Bekir Aqueduct in Larnaca. We have an aqueduct in Lefke. Bridges, we have Said Pasha Bridge. We have fountains. Many fountains were spotted across Cyprus, built in the Ottoman times. Turkish baths, hammams. Cemeteries, the largest cemetery, I think from my knowledge, the second largest in the Ottoman state was in Lefkoşa. Currently, it is in the place with the Turkish embassy and the Turkish schools, and there's a petrol station across from Girne Kapısı, the Kirinya Gate. All of that was an Ottoman cemetery. Tombs, I mentioned Hala Sultan, Haram, who is in Larnaca. Piridede in Leymosun, Limassol. Hazreti Osman Tekke in Çatalköy, Northern Cyprus. Kırklar, Bayraktar. All of these house either saints or Ottoman soldiers who were martyred or lay in peace in Cyprus. We have castles, Larnaca, Limassol, Paphos. Now, there will be those who would say the foundations of those buildings were built by Greeks or Latins. If a building has been demolished and the Ottomans decided to build on those foundations, who built that building? Is it not an Ottoman building? I'm sure if we were to dig further down, we'd find prehistoric findings as well. Right? So we need to take, or the Turks of Cyprus need to take ownership of these properties. Libraries, Sultan Mahmud of the time, he is the one who introduced the Tanzimat, the reforms in the Ottoman state. He realized that there was a nationalist movement inspired by the creation of Greece in 1821. So he wanted to support and develop the intellectual class of the Turks in Cyprus, and thus he actually supported the foundation of a library, Sultan Mahmud Library in Lefkoşa, Nicosia, opposite the Hagia Sophia Mosque, which is currently called Selimiye. 4,000 books were held in that library, in Turkish, in Persian, in Arabic, the intellectual languages of the Islamic civilization. Sultan Mahmud himself in 1829 donated his books from his own collection. Women's rights in Ottoman Cyprus. It's far too common for us to look to our history through the lens of Christian Europeans. In slavery, we look through the lens of European slavery. In human rights, we need to talk about women's rights in Ottoman Cyprus. They had the right to property, owning property. Divorce, what they call khul. They could go to a judge and complain. My husband doesn't treat me right, he's beating me, he's treating me in such and such way. And she had the right to divorce. Whereas in the Christian world, till death do us apart. Inheritance. She had full financial independence, such that we can see from the Kıbrıs Şeriye Sicili, which means the Cyprus Sharia records of 1594, we have Sakine of Nicosia in court regarding 13,711 akçe from Hatice. Women were borrowing great sums of money between each other and were having arguments about this and had to go to court. We have again in the Sharia Sicili's records. In 1595, Mihriban purchases houses, gardens full of olive trees, land from her husband, Bayezid, for 25,000 Osmani akçe. I wonder who had the pants in that marriage. We have the Christians benefiting from the system introduced by the Ottomans. Lino Constantine, a Christian woman, divorces her husband in Cyprus Sharia court. So the Christians had full autonomy in Cyprus. They had their own court, they had their own laws, but they had the choice, the opportunity to benefit from the Ottoman courts. And many chose to do so, as did Lino Constantine here. Now let's compare that with the UK, where we currently are. In the UK, you have the Married Women's Act of 1882. A married woman had the right to property in 1882. So when the British came in 1878, Ottoman women, Muslim, Christian, Romeos, Turkos, had more rights than the women in England. Early British era, which can be divided up into 1878, the British Protectorate. Why did they come? We're going to answer this question as well. 1914, illegal annexation. 1925, a British colony. At the time, there was Abdul Hamid II who was in power. And the Ottomans, why would they give Cyprus away? Sometimes I even hear this thing, Cyprus was rented and all of this. Let's first of all hear the backdrop. We have Edward Stanley, Earl of Derby. He was in the Parliament. He actually quit the Parliament in protest because England was planning, Britain was planning, if the Ottomans were not to give Cyprus to the British, they would take it by force. And so he said, a friendly power like the Ottomans, they were allies with the Ottoman at the time, how can we do this, stab them in the back in such a way? This is all recorded in the Hansard. We have Sir Henry Layard, British ambassador to Constantinople, Istanbul, who is recorded to have said, it's in Ottoman Turkish, by the way, the reason being that Mahmud Celaleddin Pasha actually recorded this in his book. Eğer devleti aliye kendiliğinden Kıbrıs'ı vermez ise biz cebren alırız. If the Ottomans, the Grand State Devleti Aliye, does not willfully give Cyprus to us, cebren alırız. We will take it by force. The Ottomans at this time were in a very weak state. They had great debts. They had the Balkan Wars, the Russian, the Orthodox were all trying to take land from them. On the other side we have what they call Elviye-i Selase, the three provinces of Ardahan, Batum and Kars in the east of Anatolia, which was taken. The nationalistic uprisings of the Orthodox people was a major threat. No Istanbul, no Ottomans, no Turks in Cyprus. So therefore, rather than letting them take it for free, for which they would have no power to protect, Abdülhamid came up with a convention. He wasn't quite happy with everything mentioned, so he put an imperial edict, a Hakkı Hümayun. And Abdülhamid mentions Hukuk-i Şahaname asla halel gelmemek şartıyla muahedinameyi tasdik ederim. Meaning that I am accepting these conditions with the agreement that the Hukuk-i Şahaname, the imperial law, will continue forever. So this stipulation alone means that the British were administrating Cyprus, had soldiers there. Who owns that island? And those that say Cyprus was given away, Cyprus was rented. No, Cyprus was not rented. I refuse to accept this. In fact, my friend, the historian Mustafa Hashim Altan, he even said if anybody can find evidence to prove that Cyprus was rented, he will change his name. It's not possible. Why? Because in the convention it says Tedafui bir ittifak, which means that this was a defense pact. It's a military alliance, not a rental. Cyprus wasn't rented. So it remained as such, as I mentioned, until World War I, where the British used that as a pretext to snatch Cyprus, but the Ottomans still laid claim to it up until 1923, with the establishment of the Turkish Republic. A very sad time because Turkey was in a very weak position. And in Treaty of Lausanne, 1923, Article 20, it mentions that Turkey is recognizing that the British are in control of Cyprus. And it was İsmet İnönü, who would later become the second president of Turkey, who was to sign this. We don't make any judgment because the times were very different then. The British coming had a great impact on our cultural, religious, ethnic heritage. The Kirinya Gate had a great calligraphy by Feyzullah Dede with inscriptions from the Quran. The British came and switched it around. The Sarayönü Square, where they have the column, the Venetian column, when the Ottomans came, they removed that column. That column is a symbol of oppression. The Latins oppressed the Orthodox people. So they threw that away, where the Sarayönü Cami is, the mosque. When the British came, they re-erected it to its present position. A symbolic way, perhaps, to suggest their domination of the island. Now, when it comes to our identity, we've gone through a very rushed history of Cyprus related to the Turks of Cyprus. We don't want to superimpose our views, whether we see ourselves as Muslim Cypriots, Ottoman Cypriots, Turkish Cypriots, Cypriots, however you want to mention yourself. How did they view themselves throughout that time? That's what's important. Otherwise, if you're trying to impose something for political reasons or cultural reasons or your own, whatever reason it may be, this is called a major fallacy of presentism. You're viewing things through the lens of the current day. We want to view things through the lens of the records of those people. How did they view that through the ages? Let's go through step by step. Let's go through Muslim first. We have a Muslim ve gayrimüslim ahalinin arzu hali. So a request by the Kıbrıs Ceziresinde from the island of Cyprus olan ehli İslam ve ehli zimmet. Ehli Islam, the people of Islam, and the people of Zimma, those who pay the jizya, non-Muslims. So, in this record in 1789, it's referring from a religious perspective, Muslims and non-Muslims. Mufti Ziya Efendi in 1911, this is early British era now, he mentions in one of his documents, Cezire-i ahali İslamiye, the Islamic people, or the Muslims of the island of Cyprus. So again, he's emphasizing the Muslim side. We also have Birlik Gazetesi, the Birlik, or the Union newspaper, which is a newspaper published in Cyprus in 1924, refers to them as Kıbrıs Müslümanları, the Cypriot Muslims. We have the National Geographic Society in 1928, and mentions these lovely ladies here as the Muslim women of Cyprus in Kukla, Paphos. That green flag there is used by the Ottomans to represent the Muslim people, by the way. So we have the Muslim argument. How about Ottoman? So we have here this gentleman with the fez, Kaytazzadeh Mehmet Nazım Bey, who died in 1924. He wrote a poem, Rahmeyleriz, vicdanlıyız, Osmanlıyız. He says there, Osmanlıyız, Osmanlıyız, alemde biz pek şanlıyız. He mentioned this in his poem. He is proud to be an Ottoman. He is the grandfather, in fact, of Şeyh Nazım Kıbrısi. We have this other gentleman, Dr. Hafız Cemal, who is from Paphos. Originally, he moved eventually to Istanbul. He would also support the war effort, the Turkish independence war effort. And he wrote a book in 1909, published in Nicosia, Kıbrıs Osmanlılarına mahsus son hediye-i acizane, my special gift to the Muslims of Cyprus. If you notice that these two examples are from a later Ottoman period, when Ottomanism was rife. So they viewed themselves as Ottoman Cypriot. How about the argument for Turk? We have a number of records here. I've heard some strange ideas, some of which saying that the British came and took the term Turk and enforced it on the Cypriot Muslims, and took the term Greek and enforced it on the Orthodox people. If that was the case, then why is it that we have examples from 1595? Türkmen, Osman, 1595. The British were not there at the time. The British, they weren't even aware they're English at the time. Türkmen, Osman. 1688, a decree of exile. Bey Pazarlı Türk Muhammed, causing mischief in Anatolia, is sent to exile, and he settles in Cyprus. Turk Muhammed, his name is not Turk. The naming function of those times had lakab and isim. Isim is name. His name is Muhammad. His lakab is Turk. Türkmen Osman, his name is Osman. His lakab is Türkmen. So these are Turkish sources, early ones. Let's go to Greek source. Gibrianos, one of the major sources in Cypriot history. Historia dis Gibru, 1788. He gives it in his census, and he mentions that the Orthodox people are Christianon, Christians. Does he say Muslims for the Turks? He says Türkon, the Turks. So the Orthodox people also recognize the idea of Turkishness, albeit it may be in a different concept than what we view it from now, but nonetheless, Turk was recognized. The Ottoman census of 1831, Muhammed bin Türk Ali, Muhammad the son of Türk Ali, who was from the Kariye, the village of Siliku, from the Kazai Gilan, from the Gilan district. The same census mentions Türk Hasan bin Ahmed, Türk Hasan, son of Ahmed, from Lefkoşa, and we even know which neighborhood. Mahalle Ibrahim Pasha, the neighborhood of Ibrahim Pasha, had this individual. We have Şemseddin Sami, Kamusül Alam, 1896. This is a fantastic dictionary, encyclopedia. Anyone who can read Ottoman Turkish, I highly recommend you to find this out. It says, Hristiyanları, referring to Cyprus, Hristiyanları ekseriyet üzere Rum ve Müslümanları Türktür. Saying that the Christians overall are Greek, or Romans. Ve Müslümanları Türktür. And the Muslims are Turks. he doesn't say the majority or 80%. He says overwhelming. He says the Muslims are Turkish. That's 1896. And here we have a government of Cyprus, British era, identity card, 1956. This is my great-grandmother, by the way, from Polomytia, Limassol. The British recognized her race as Turk Muslim, rather fittingly. A Turk Muslim. There was also a saying in Ottoman times and early British times that the Greeks would call old Turkish men. They would say, Yero Turko, old Turk. If you haven't heard this and you're Cypriot, ask your elders, they will know. Yero Turko, old Turk. Why not old Cypriot? Why not old Muslimanos? Ottomanos? No, Turkos. Cypriot. Let's go with this. This seems to be a fashionable one. Let's investigate this now. We have on this left-hand side this fine-looking gentleman. It says on the bottom there, Sadr-i Esbak Kıbrıslı Muhammed Pasha. Sadr-i Esbak means the previous or the former vizier, Muhammad, which is, the short version is Mehmet Emin Pasha. We have in the Başbakanlık Archive, the Presidential Ottoman Archives of Turkey, recorded in 1842, Kıbrısı Es-Seyyid Hasan Tahsin Efendi. So Es-Seyyid means that he's a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. We have a descendant, a Cypriot descendant of the Prophet, Hasan Tahsin Efendi, who's referred to as Kıbrısı, Cypriot. In Tezkire-i Hatimetül Eş'ar, encyclopedic work of poets, we find a Cypriot in there as well. Kıbrısı Müfti Hasan Hilmi Efendi. The Mufti Hasan Hilmi Efendi of Cyprus, or the Cypriot. And here we have another one of my relations, my great-grandfather, who actually briefly went to Turkey. Any resemblance? Okay. And this is a very early Türkiye Republic passport. TC Hüviyet Cüzdanı from 1925, 2 years after the formation of Turkey. And it says on the bottom there, I took a snippet from his passport. It says, İsim ve şöhreti, his name and his title. Kıbrıslı Hacı Ali. Hacı Ali, he's been to Hajj, so he gets the title Hacı. Kıbrıslı from Cyprus. Now what we need to understand in this is that Kıbrıslı Muhammed Pasha wasn't living in Cyprus, he was in Istanbul. So it's very normal for something to indicate him as something that's different from the norm. Kıbrıslı is Cypriot, of course. And same with Hasan Tahsin Efendi, this is a encyclopedic work for a general Turkish reading audience. So it's very natural to be recorded as Kıbrısı. Kıbrısı Müfti Hasan Hilmi Efendi, or Kıbrıslı Hacı Ali. But these people were not known as Kıbrıslı or Kıbrısı in Cyprus itself. They would have other terms, Hacı, Müftü, and so on there, Renşber, farmer, and so on. So what we need to understand is, and what I find beautiful is, although in this age we're forced to pick one and it's at odds with each other, but are we doing the same with our own identities? If you are a daughter and you're married, do you say you have to pick whether you're a wife or a daughter? No. All of these are part of who you are, what makes you. And similarly, the Cypriot Muslims, the Turks, they accepted the term title of Muslim. They accepted that they were Ottoman. They accepted that they were Turk, and they accepted that they were Cypriot. All was used within the correct context. Not for political reasons, not for fashionable reasons, not for likes on Instagram. This is what's recorded. Peace on Cyprus, the good old days. Unfortunately, those good old days didn't end in the 60s or the 30s. But the source of this Cyprus problem goes back to the Hellenic Insurrection of 1821 in Moria, the Peloponnese, modern day Greece. It started with an organization called Filigetria, where they started to contact Greek-speaking Roman Orthodox people, Romios, from various places, the Balkans, from Cyprus and Anatolia and such, and they wanted what was called the megalidea, the big idea or the great idea of establishing some sort of a Neo-Byzantine empire that would be for Greek-speaking people. They contacted Archbishop Gibriano, of Cyprus. And Gibriano did actually send resources, and even they trained men. As you can see on the right there, the flag of Paralimni, where Greeks, Roms were recruited and went off to the Moria. We know that there was around 1,000 Cypriot Roms who fought in the Hellenic Insurrection, and we have their names recorded of 580. What kind of a mindset would one have coming from and genociding the Muslims of the Moria? We have a book here written at the time that Greece might still be free. It says, within a few weeks of the outbreak of the revolution, the Turkish and Muslim Albanian population of the Peloponnese, previously about a ninth of the whole, had ceased to exist as a settled community. Massacres, genocide, a holocaust of the Muslims. These Cypriots who were going there were part and parcel of this. What kind of a mentality would they come back with? Would Britain accept anyone from Daesh to come back to the UK? No. They have a messed up killing mentality. But these people were coming back to Cyprus. And hence I say that was the end or the source of the Cyprus problem. We have on the top left there a flag. This is an original flag that was used by the Roms, Cypriot Roms, who fought for the independence of Greece. It says on there, Semea Elinegi Patris Kibru, flag of the Greek land of Cyprus. On the bottom we see, on the bottom left, recruits, and on the top and the bottom right we see capital punishment being exerted to Gibriano for high treason in 1821. He was even planning to have an uprising in Nicosia and Pascalia in Easter. So a stop had to be made. We even have politicians from that early period. Charalambos Malis, a Cypriot Rom who was a politician of that early period. And we have Küçük Mehmet Pasha, who was the governor of Cyprus at the time, who was to put a stop to this in Cyprus, who gave the capital punishment. And it's good he did, because more would have been killed had he have not put a stop to it. Unfortunately, because of all the killing, we have 54 Mauryan Turks who settled in Nicosia. How do we know this? The meticulous record keeping of our Ottoman forefathers, of course. This is the original on the, to your right, of the names of the people, of the males. The males would only be recorded in that time period. From various ages. Where did they settle? Moradan hicret edip el haletü hazihi Medine-i Lefkoşa'da Ömeriye mahallesinde iskan edenlerin esamileridir. Saying the people that were exiled, the names of the people who were exiled from Moria, who were to settle in the city of Nicosia in the neighborhood of Ömeriye, which is currently in the southern side of Nicosia. We have their names, Dervish bin Hassan, Garandashi Mahmud, Garandashi Hussein, and so on and so forth. These are the ancestors of the Turks of Cyprus. You have that Mauryan blood in you. So when you do your ancestry and your DNA, oh, I have a bit of Greek in me. Is that Greek or is it Mauryan? If that's the case, your ancestors were the victims of genocide. And they survived by settling in Ömeriye district or neighborhood of Nicosia. This is the unfortunate reality. There's beautiful things in our history, and there's some very sad things. We need to embrace it all. We also have attacks in early British period. I won't go through all of them, but from 1894 in Paphos, Tahtakale, Mandralas, Limassol. In 1912 even, a Turk went into a Greek or Rum shop, and he sees on it, it says, 1912 Kıbrıs ihtilali Türkleri yiyecek. The 1912 Cypriot uprising will devour the Turks. Good old days, peaceful days. Yeah, he said, Kardeşir, yeah? Yeah? And a funny bunch, which, to be honest, doesn't really even deserve any mention, but it's become such a fashionable trend now. Linobambakoi. I am Linobambakoi. Really? What's Linobambakoi? Linobambakoi is referring to what's in Greek, Linobambakoi, in Greek, a peculiar branch of people who they say is crypto-Christian. Crypto-Christian means somebody who's secretly a Christian but pretends to be Muslim. Why? What would be the motivation? Okay, they didn't want to pay the jizya, the poll tax for non-Muslims. Seems reasonable, right? What about seferberlik? Seferberlik is military service. Only Muslims in an Islamic state, including the Ottoman state, would conduct seferberlik on their males. Christians were exempt from this. They are paying, the Christians would pay jizya to be protected. Their lives, their honor, their properties to be protected by the Muslims would go and fight and protect them. So this curious bunch who are labeled as crypto-Christians would also be crypto-Muslims. When it came time for jizya, they said, no, we are Muslim. And when it came time for seferberlik, they suddenly become Christian. Where were they from? What were their roots? They are the leftovers of people of Latin extraction. Majority of which would have become Orthodox or Muslim. But this was a handful of people, estimated in 1878 to be 1,200 people. All these people that claim Linobambakoi, from 1,200 people? Really? Are converts to Linobambakoi? I'm seeing that the self-declared Republic of Cyprus, in their official works of history, if we want to call it that, are saying that the Turkish Cypriots are from Linobambakoi. Well, all of us came from 1,200 people. First, acknowledge my history and my heritage, then we can talk on the table. As Cezire Derneği, my Derneği tries to record research about our history, this is our history. If you're not willing to talk about my true history, and you're going to say Linobambakoi, then we have nothing to talk about. First, get the history right. So, converts, a convert is a convert. Is mentioned as such in the Ottoman records. They weren't hiding anything. The records specify if he was a convert or his father was a Christian. It's all mentioned there. No need for Linobambakoi. And the Turkish for it, many would call it Mezokorto. How come all these Cypriotists don't say Mezokorto? I thought you were a Cypriot. You should know these terms, right? Why do you have to feel the need to use a Greek term? Mezokorto comes from the Italian mezzo, corto, half, quarter. So if anybody was displaying signs of he's partially Muslim, he might be having a drink here and there, he's a corto, you know, he's in part Muslim, he's being part Christian. Okay? Where are they now? Some of them converted to Islam, but the majority of them converted to Orthodox Christianity. And I'll be displaying why. Remember, 1878 was the British era. There's no need to kind of hide who you are anymore. The Ottomans are not administrating the island anymore. We have Captain A.R. Saville, perhaps an ancestor of Jimmy. He said a somewhat different sect also exists on the island, members of which have been called Linobambakoi. That is linen and cotton, a figurative expression meaning a mixture of Christian and Muslim. These people do not number more than about 1,200. They are distributed chiefly near Nicosia, Famagusta, Limassol, and in a village called Leo Pitru. Apostasy. We see in the British era great apostasy, which was known as tenessür in Ottoman Turkish. Tenessür becomes you have become a Nasrani, a Christian. This was due to poverty. There was great poverty. The Ottomans couldn't invest during the end time because of all the wars. We have Captain Saville here in 1878 saying the Christian population is far more industrious and zealous in their acquisition of wealth than the Mohammedan, meaning the Muslim. And for many years past in the sales of land, the latter have generally been the sellers and rarely the purchasers. We have a newspaper in 1881, a Cypriot publication, Neon Kidu, 1881, which from many parts of the island, each week it is reported that 2 or 3 Muslim families are baptized. What does it mean to become baptized? It's not like it is now. A Turk could not be a Christian. A Greek or Rom could not be a Muslim, because Christianization means Hellenization. Islamization means Turkification. And so this tenessür was Christianization, and the descendants of such are now living in the south. And from what I hear from my Greek friends in the south, the most nationalist, EOKA supporting Greeks are those who have Turkish heritage through this tenessür process. And such a letter of urgency was written by Hacı Mehmet Ziyahi Efendi. And he was actually made by the Ottomans as a seyyar vaiz, a traveling advisor or Islamic personality. He says that ahali İslamiyesi umumen tenessür eden köyler, so the villages that were generally or mostly Christianized from amongst the people of Islam, Korfi, Lanya, Ayodino, Monarul, Doro, Monari, Trimiklini, Limnat, Vavla, Ayos, Anglisia, Vavatsinia. This is the original on the right, guys. Then he continues on to say, Ahali İslamiyesi kısmen tenessür eden köyler. So kısmen, partially becoming Christian. Milya, Hrinya, Pishahi, Yukarı Civya, Ayatotoro, Girit Marot, Ayamerkur, Fasulla. Fasulla in Ottoman times was 100% Muslim. Further on in his document, this is a letter of urgency to the Ottoman state, mind you, in 1910. İsimlerini bilmediğim daha birçok köyler ma teessüf beliye tenessüller musabiddirler. There is so many other villages which have Christianized which I'm not even aware of. Nimeti mariften mahrum bahusus merkezden bayit olanlar ise lisani Osmani'yi de tekellümden acizdirler. It's saying that there were many people, many Turks who did not have the education to learn Lisani Osmani, the language of the Ottomans, that being Turkish language. So that's when we think about the living history of Cyprus, that means you're referring back to your grandparents or your parent generation. Oh, my grandparents were speaking Greek. Oh, they add the Greek words in there. Why? Because merkezden bayit olanlar, the people that were away from the centers, as in Nicosia, the city centers, they did not have the educational needs to learn Turkish. So the start of that mixture of the language from this period. In Ottoman times we will see how the situation was. He goes on to say, rahipler birçok Müslümanlar ifal ile tebdili mezhep etmelerine zaferyap olmuşlardır. He says that the priests were tricking the Muslims and they were very victorious or very successful in doing so. I'll be done shortly. The language, I mentioned, they said that the Ma'arif, the education of the Turks, was missing in the British era. But in 1873 we see Ludwig Salvator, who spent much time and he wrote the great work Lefkosia. The language of the Turks in Cyprus is very pure. It is said to be the best Turkish of that of Constantinople. In contrast, the Greek spoken by Cypriots is a dialect with numerous Italian words. I'll skip the Italian words, as well as many Turkish words. The Turkish language is widely spoken in Nicosia. Men who cannot speak it are rarely found, while there are many who know only Turkish. Additionally, many Greek women are completely proficient in it. Very interesting. We go forward to 1896, Kamusu Alam again. It says, Hristiyanları ekseriyet üzere Rum, I mentioned this, ve Müslümanlara Türktür. Binaenaleyh Cezire'de iki lisan söylenip ve Rumların da çoğu Türkçe ve Müslümanların bazısı Rumca biliyor. It says that the majority of the Rums can speak Turkish, whilst some of the Turks can speak Greek. How things have changed. Emigration. When the British came, they deported 314 Turkish convicts to Anatolia. Here we see an image of 266 Turkish convicts on board the HMS Black Prince in 1878. I see no such record of Greek or Rum convicts being deported to Greece. Why the double standard? What was the motivation here by the English? 1924, Cumhuriyet Gazetesi of Turkey mentions Adana'ya Kıbrıs'tan muhacir geliyor. It mentions that there are many muhajirs, migrants coming from Cyprus. There's also in Neos Philax, 1926, a Greek publication in Cyprus by the Turkish Malta, is referring to the name of the ship. 25 Ottoman families departed yesterday for Asia Minor, most of them originating from Lurigina. Those who claim that Lurigina was Linobambakoi, why would such people with such a sense of being Muslim and Turkish hate the idea of being ruled by the British to such an extent that they left to Anatolia? And we have again Cumhuriyet Gazetesi in 1926 saying, Kıbrıs Müslümanları Türkiye'ye hicret etmek isteyenleri miktarı 20.000 bali olmaktadır. Saying that in 1926 there was 20,000 people in Cyprus who wished to move to Anatolia, modern day Turkey. Quickly just go through the demographics for you. Kyprianos, who I mentioned earlier, the great historian of Cyprus, Historia dis Kipru, 1788, he mentions, now I don't know whether it's true or not, but the priests would keep records of the censuses for tax collection. he mentions that the Hristiyanon were in total 37,000. And the Turkon, the Turks, were 47,000, with a total population of Cyprus being 84,000. That would put the Turks, the Turkon, as he puts it, the Turks, in the majority. Whereas we have actual census records from Ottoman and the early British eras as well, we can see that from the Muslims being 33.4% of the island, in 1931 were 18.5% of the island. So any talk or any negotiation based on latest figures isn't fair. We move on to something more positive now. A culture of Ottoman loyalty. We have on the left here Kıbrıs Gazetesi, who has the armour of the Ottomans in celebration of the birthday of Abdülhamid II. And on this occasion there will be great rejoicing parties and such because of the Ottoman Sultan, despite the fact that they were under British administration. We have in 1906 Turks of Cyprus contribute towards the Hamidiye Hijaz Railway. We have Aşık Kenzi, a famous poet and mujahid, a fighter, who fought in the Battle of Missolonghi and the Battle of Athens, a Nicosean himself, a Turk who fought for the Ottomans. We have Dr. Mehmet Ali Erginel of Lapta, who died in 1971. He was part of the Turkish independence struggle as well. We have Dr. Hafız Cemal, the Paphos, the person from Paphos, Baflı, who also supported in medical aid towards the Turkish Freedom Act. We have Ibrahim Ali, who sold his horse and donated the money to the refugees in Turkey. Many refugees from the Balkans, the Caucasus, and elsewhere were coming in and they needed help. On the 3rd of March 1914, the Muslims of Limassol donate £101, 13 shillings and 3 kurush to the Ottoman Navy League. This was the sympathies that they had. Their hearts was always with the Ottomans. We have a culture of Islamic piety, such that Mariti, when he visited Cyprus in 1769, we're talking about our heritage, our traditions, not what we or our ideas of religion may be. How were the people at that time? Well, in 1793, Mariti mentions the Turks must pray to God 5 times a day. Those who are occupied with work sometimes omit praying at certain prescribed times, limiting themselves to only 1 or 2 prayers. So the irreligious amongst the Turks of Cyprus would pray once or twice a day, not the 5. The census of 1901 mentions that in the case of Mohammedan families, the names of the female relatives need not be given if any objection is given. No such stipulation is mentioned for the Greeks. Because in that time, the traditional culture of the Turks, you don't mention the female members' names. It was a matter of honor. Who are you to mention my wife's name, my sister's name, my daughter's name? It could even lead to bloodshed. This was all due to the honor that they had for their women. We have Bayram or Eid festivities in Nicosia in 1917. We can see the women in Çarşaf, and we can see it's led by the leading elite of the Turks of Cyprus. Muftus, heads of the Mevlevis and so on were leading that, and everybody was coming as if they're rock stars. 1928, Daire-i Marif-i Şehadetname, a certificate, was given to children in schools, and we see that the subjects amongst them was Quran ma'a tajvid, Quran along with the correct pronunciation. We see that there's Diniye, ulum-i diniye, religious education. We see that there's geography, there's Greek, there's English, science and PE, even physical education. It was a well-mixed curriculum, which included Islam at the time. We had religious orders. So the Turks of Cyprus, traditionally, have been Sunni Muslims, majority of which. Some Kızılbaş, but they were not in a majority. They were majority Sunni, belonging to the Hanefi school of thought in the canonical law, and they were Maturidi in theology. And then if you break this up even further, there was religious orders, tarikats, which means a road towards God. The largest tradition in Cyprus was the Mevlevi order. The Naqshbandis were also very influential. They were more of the hardliners within the Sufi orders. Qadiri, Rifai, Bektashi, which used to be more Sunni before. And now it's gone more with the Kızılbaş, or what they call Alevi. It's going to become very close with them now in present day. And Bedevi, which is from Egypt originally, from a place called Tantar. This is a tradition of the Cypriot Turks. if this all seems, for those of you who are familiar with Cypriot Turks, or are belonging to these people, if this all seems very alien to you, then how well do you know your culture? How well do we know our history? That's the question that should be asked. Literary culture. When we think of Cypriot Turks, what do we think of first? Meze mangal? Çifte telli? Molahia? It's all very good and tasty. But we should also think a people that have a rich literary culture. We have here Tercüme-i Delail-i Şerif, written in 1717 by Ahmed Efendi Kıbrısı, the Cypriot. Delail-i Şerif is a poem, a very famous poem recited by Muslims all around the world. And the tercüme here can mean translation, but in this context it means that it's an exegesis, an explanation of that poem. 1717 we have Dasitani Kıbrıs by our very own Aşık Kenzi, who is a very famous poet. And I'll just read, if I may, just a small part of his poem. Thank you very much. Bunlar dört adadır alemde namdar, Mora, Girit, Kırım, Kıbrıs aşikar. İkisini zapt etti hilekar küffar. İkisi İslam'da bu dem bu saat. Girit'te uğradı bu temaşaya. Baş oldu Muhammed Ali Paşa'ya. Medine vakfıdır Kıbrıs yasaya. Kudüs'le Kıbrıs'ı verir mi devlet? Which translates to, there are 4 islands globally known. Moria, Crete, Crimea, Cyprus are known. 2 have been seized by the deceitful infidel. 2 belong to Islam at this moment of time. Crete has also witnessed this, given to Muhammad Ali Pasha. Cyprus belongs to the Medina Charitable Trust. Can the state give away Jerusalem or Cyprus? Now we think of 2024. What's the situation in Cyprus and Jerusalem now? And how was it in the days of the Ottomans? Peace, multiculturalism. And today we see what we see now. We have Ümmü Haram, written by Hilmi Efendi. Felaket, which is a play written by Mausala Hasan Nefi in 1875, which was published in Istanbul. And we have the first to be published in Nicosia, Yadigari Muhabbet in 1893 by our very own Kaytazade Nazım Efendi, grandfather of Sheikh Nazım Kıbrısı. Turkish newspapers, I won't go through them all, I just find the calligraphy in these newspapers so beautiful. Look at the attention to detail, the artwork that had to go into that. Seyf Gazetesi, Davul, Islam, Mirati Zaman, and so on. We're getting there, guys. So the Romans, they're Roman Orthodox. They call themselves Romios. Greek Orthodox is a nationalistic modern term. They have little to nothing ethnically, racially to the people of Greece. If they want to see themselves as Greek now, we respect that. But traditionally, they were always calling themselves Rum, and we call them as such as well, Romios. This was their clothing. What they call here, the gentleman in the middle is from the Ottoman period. He has the long baggy breeches, which is called vraga in Greek, and it's called dizlik in Turkish. They would wear black. That was the color of the Christians. Remember, the Christians wore different clothing to the Muslims. Then we have a Rum woman here, which in the Turkish dialect we call Cira. Rum woman from 1835. Look how she's dressed. This is not a Turkish woman, this is not a Muslim woman, this is a Christian Orthodox lady. And even in the early British period, we see these fine gentlemen here in 1931 with their vraga and their dark clothing, and on the right there is a papaz, a priest. But how did the Turks dress? Did they dress the same? Was it very similar? We've got a Greek woman here. Keep that mental image, guys. Women's attire from the Ottoman period to the early British era. From Nicosia Friday Ladies Bazaar, which was a ladies' exclusive market. They had financial independence in what they call çarşaf. Majority of them would wear white, but they were also striped and other colors. But predominantly they would wear çarşaf, which is quite literally a bed sheet, if we translate it to English. Elmud Caddesi, Elmud in Nicosia, in the south of Nicosia, now 1930s çarşaf. Nicosia 1838, 1882, Ayandronigo 1931, which is in the Karpas Peninsula. Famagusta 1922, Landa Kaperis Terona in 1950s, Limassol 1882, Paphos 1878, Kukla 1928. The standard here is çarşaf. Whether we like it, we don't like it, is irrelevant. This is how the traditional dress was. The folk dance, guys. What's the clothing like? Let's compare it to this. Is there anyone amongst us who looks like in that clothing? Ladies, please, sorry to put you on the spot. Where are you from? Dohni Lurican, that's in Cyprus.
Yes,
From Cyprus?
Yeah.
You? Karpaz? Okay, I see similarity. There's a cultural continuation here. Thank you. How are the men dressed? So the vraga I mentioned were the Greeks, they're called dizlik. So it's a shalvar of Anatolia up to the knee length. And they would wear either blue or white to denote that they are Turks. They are not Romios. Darul Feyz Mektebi, Limassol, 1911. We have a gentleman here, 1828. So we can see how the dress was pre-change in the Ottoman Empire with the turbans, and it goes into the fezes here. All the way up to Peristorona in 1950s. Peristorona was known as a more conservative, more religious village in comparison. And let's end this on the Turkish luminaries on Cyprus. Remember, I want you all to go away with the idea that the Turkish people of Cyprus have traditionally been literate people, cultured people, educated and contributing to the world literary heritage. We have Siyahi Mustafa there, who's represented by the gentleman on the end there. His mother was from Habeshistan, from Abyssinia, hence why he was black. But we still accept him. We're not racist. He's a Turkish Cypriot. He was the head of the Mevlevi order, and he was also a distinguished poet of the Divan type. Very rich. Mufti Hilmi Efendi, he went to Istanbul to thank the Sultan for the library, and he wrote poetry for him, such that the Sultan Mahmud II said that you are Sultan al-Shu'ara, or Reis al-Shu'ara, you are the Sultan of the poets. Out of all the Ottoman Empire, the Sultan of the poets was a Nicosean. And this earned the jealousy of the people around him, so he left secretly and went to Cyprus. The Sultan, rather than punishing him for leaving, he rewarded him by making him the Mufti of Cyprus, Mufti Kubrisi, as is recorded. Muhammad Emin Pasha, Kiamin Pasha, they were Grand Viziers of the Ottoman Empire, Cypriots. Necmi Sakıp Bodamyalızade, an intellectual who was the head of the Shakespeare School. He knew English very well. In fact, he was one of the early translators of the Quran into English before the famous Pickthall translation. There was a translation by our very own Bodamyalızade. We have Ahmed Efendi Kubrisi, who wrote that great book that we mentioned earlier. Aşık Kenzi, the person who was writing poetry, who was a soldier for the Ottomans, who would travel back and forth to Nicosia. His heart was very much attached to Cyprus. We have Dr. Hafiz Cemal, who I mentioned. Not only was he a doctor, he published books about medicine and such and health, but he also supported the Turkish war efforts. We have Kıbrıslı Muhammed Kapudan, who was a recorded Cypriot captain of the Donanmayı Humayun Imperial Galley, the captain of which was a Cypriot, a Turkish Cypriot. And his name of the galleon was Seyyari Bahri. Feyzullah Dede, who I mentioned earlier, he was the head of the Mevlevi order. He was a distinguished poet and he was also a calligrapher. So before we come and close, I want you all to think about, when we think of the Turks of Cyprus, we want to think about an intellectual people, calligraphers, poets, religious clergymen, statesmen. This is the standard that Cyprus has raised. Thank you very much. Teşekkür ederim.
Right guys, we'll now have a break, but I just want to say a big thank you to Mustafa Abi. He's given us a lot of information and covered a lot of history. So if you have any questions for him for the Q&A, I suggest you write it down now so that afterwards you can remember them for after Ersu Abi's presentation. But once again, thank you Mustafa Abi, that was fantastic. So we look to start again in about 10 minutes, so 5 to 8. If you need to get up, move your legs, go to the bathroom, please go ahead. Thank you.